Did you fight in the trenches?
Oh, yes. Yes, we were in the dugouts in the hole ground, you know. And it rained every day while we was on the bow sector. And everything was so wet. And we all contracted colds and sinus trouble, and we had an awful time. And but in the trenches, the dugouts, I had some experiences. Well, you want to know some real experiences? Well, there was a man by the name of ain't that funny? I can't think of his name right now. But the second night that we was on the front line trench, he came to me with a letter, and he says, Jeppeson, he says, I've got to go out on that outlook post between our two sections, and I don't think I'll come back alive. Why not? You got just as good a chance as anybody else. And you know, the next morning they come carrying that fella up, and I had to take that letter to our captain. And captain couldn't get over it. He was from Washington, D.C. too. And he couldn't get over it that a man had that tuition that he was going to get killed, and he did get killed that night. Another experience, first night in the trenches, I was chosen with another sergeant. We was, of course, acting sergeants, both of us. We weren't real sergeants, but we were acting sergeants. And we had a squad of men apiece, and the French posted us on outlook posts outside of the front line trenches. And his men, I'll never forget it, when they were posted, they came to me instead of Sergeant Dahlquist and said, for goodness sake, see that we get our relief in 2 hours. See, you know, they get their relief in 2 hours. Well, I said, you got your own sergeant. Well, you can't depend on him. You see to that we get it. Well, I says, I'll do my darndest. But sure enough, when it come to line up and the 2 hours was up to set for a new guard, here, Dahlquist men were lined up, and we had to inspect each man, see that he had his full equipment, ammunition, rifle, and hand grenades, and all that stuff. And one of my men didn't have his belt, so I had to send him to get his belt. And meanwhile, Dahlquist starts out with his squad. Well, there was a bunch of paths that come together, just almost like the hubs of a wheel, hubs of the wheel of a wheel. And there was only one path that you could take in order to make your first move from there. So I was looking that over, and all of a sudden, back away from me, I heard somebody hollering. I want to get a hold of a tree. I'm going to find the north side, the north direction. We didn't happen to have compasses. They didn't issue us any compasses at that time. And he was feeling on that tree to feel the moss on the tree, see. Well, I heard him and I recognized his voice, so I went over to him. I said, what in the world are you doing over here? Well, he says, I went up there in that path, and he says, I made that round trip and here I am. Well, I says, you're all wrong. I says, you got to come up with me, and I says, we're going to see to that we get the right path. So up to the wheel spokes there, like, we looked it over, and, oh, I got it, he says. Well, I says, now I tell you, you take the lead, and I'll take the tail end. It was so dark we couldn't see one another. We had to take a hold of one another's belts from the rear. And I says, I'll see if nobody falls out. So we started out. First thing we knew, to come back to the same place at Dahlquist where I found him. Well, I says, you guys lay down here. I says, I'm going to find that path. So up there I went and I struck a couple of matches and I looked at and found my path and I stepped into it. So I called the guys and they come up and they followed me. And as I got up the hill, here was our real sergeant. Who in the world lit them matches? I says, I did. What in the devil are you thinking of to go to work and light matches? If there'd been a sniper around, he'd have nailed you sure as you're alive. Well, I says, these men have been out on the outlook post. It's the first time they've been on. I says, and they're scared to death in the first place. And I says, they were asking for relief, and I says, I'm trying to give it to them. Well, he says, I'll tell you, he says, you post them, and then you go to the captain's office, and you'll have to report to him. So I posted Dahlquist and mine both, and come back, and of course I had to go with the captain. Captain says, Jeppeson, what in the world was you thinking of? Well, I says, I was only thinking about that whole bunch. I says, I didn't have them guys with me. I went up there alone. Yeah, he says, that's all right. But he says, we don't want to lose you either. So he says, don't do that again. He says, no matter if they had to stay there all night. Well, that was all there was to that. So I was excused on that. And I never had any trouble with, of course, I can tell you a lot of different things, of course. I don't know how much you want to know. But when we went up on the rifle range before we went overseas, I was hurt with a bundle of blankets that was thrown down from a truck. It hit me on the side, and so I was in the hospital for a few days. And then they had me take the men that were in the hospital that were able to go down and shoot on the rifle range and then bring them back. And I also took the KP crew down and had them shoot on the rifle range and then bring them back. Well, when I was bringing the men back from the hospital, there was one fellow standing there leaning up against an old shed, and I took another good look at him, and one eye was just kind of coming out of his head. I says, well, love him, Mike. I says, what's happened to you? Oh, he says, the sergeant got mad at me, and he gave me a beating. I says, you don't have to take no beating from anybody. I says, why didn't you fight back? Oh, he says, I was scared. Sergeant, he was my superior officer. I says, he's got no right to beat you up. So I says, I'll tend to this. So I took him down to the doctor. Then I went to Captain McCrate, and I told him what happened, that this sergeant had gone to work and beat him up. And he was our mess sergeant. They went to work and busted that guy from mess sergeant down to a private, and he fought on the front line as a private.